The train tracks stretched endlessly under the unforgiving sun, their metallic sheen slicing through the barren field like a cruel symbol of separation and oppression. A sharp voice echoed through the air, filled with disdain and authority, cutting into the tension like a knife. You think you belong here? You think this world is yours to walk free in? The words, laced with venom, weren't meant to provoke a response. They were a declaration of power, a stamp of superiority meant to silence. The boy stood frozen, his chest rising and falling with each rapid breath as the weight of injustice bore down on him. His hands were trembling, his eyes darting between the officer's face and the tracks beneath his feet. The officer smirked, his face a mask of arrogance, as he dragged the boy closer to the steel rails. You don't answer me? Fine. Maybe this will teach you who's really in charge. The boy's sneakers scuffed against the dirt as the officer pushed him forward. A zip tie was pulled tight around his wrists, the sharp plastic biting into his skin. His pulse was pounding in his ears, fear and confusion tangling in his mind. What had started as a routine moment, walking home after basketball practice, had turned into a nightmare, all because he had dared to exist in the wrong place at the wrong time. The officer knelt beside him, tightening the binds and then reaching for his radio, his casual movements contrasting the gravity of what he was doing. The boy, barely a teenager, found his voice through the lump in his throat. Please, don't do this. I didn't do anything wrong. His plea was met with a scoff. Wrong? Your kind is always wrong. The officer's words stung more than the ties on his wrists or the hot sun on his skin. They weren't just an attack on him but on everything he represented, his family, his community, his dreams. He had done nothing, yet here he was, kneeling on the tracks, the distant hum of an oncoming train a cruel reminder of how little his life seemed to matter to the man towering over him. As the vibration of the rails grew stronger, the officer leaned in close, his breath hot against the boy's ear. You'll remember this day. You'll remember what happens when you think you're above the rules. Maybe next time you'll stay where you belong. He laughed, a sound that echoed across the empty field, chilling and full of hatred. But as the officer stood, brushing off his hands as if he had done nothing more than toss out the trash, a siren pierced the air, its sharp wail cutting through the tension like a blade. The boy's heart leaped with a flicker of hope. Tires screeched to a halt, and the sound of a car door slamming broke the suffocating rhythm of the train's approach. The officer's smirk faltered as another figure stepped onto the scene. Authority radiated from him, his stride purposeful, his expression unreadable. For a moment, time seemed to stop. The boy looked up, his eyes pleading for salvation, while the officer stiffened, his facade of confidence cracking. The newcomer's eyes swept over the scene, the boy tied to the tracks, the officer standing with his hands on his hips, his smug expression failing to mask the tension in his posture. What the hell is going on here? The words were calm but sharp, like a blade honed to perfection, and the officer stumbled over his response, the arrogance in his tone replaced by a stammer of excuses. I was just teaching him a lesson, he began, but the man's gaze cut through him like a scalpel. A lesson? By tying a kid to the tracks. His voice rose, anger simmering beneath his composed exterior. The officer stepped back, his bravado crumbling under the weight of the newcomer's authority. As the train's whistle grew louder, the boy closed his eyes, bracing for the worst, but a hand was on his shoulder, pulling him up, freeing him from the binds. The relief was instant, but it was short-lived as the boy watched the confrontation unfold, his savior now locked in a battle of words with the man who had put him there. What happened next would leave everyone speechless. The officer's arrogance, his confidence, his entire world, everything he had built on prejudice and power, was about to come crashing down. The truth would come to light, secrets would unravel, and the justice that followed would send shockwaves through the town. But how could one moment of hatred, one act of cruelty, unravel a lifetime of lies? And what would happen when the boy's savior uncovered the truth behind the officer's actions, exposing a secret that would shake the foundations of everything he believed in? The story is far from over, and the ending will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about justice, vengeance, and redemption. Stay with us, because what happened next will change everything. Hello, dear viewer. Here at Plow of Twist, we stand firmly against racism and any form of discrimination. This channel is a space where stories highlight resilience, justice, and the strength of the human spirit. To our Black viewers, you are seen, heard, and valued. Your struggles and triumphs inspire change, and this story is a reflection of that strength. Stay with us for a compelling and emotional narrative that underscores the power of justice and humanity. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and join our community. Let's dive into this story together. Enjoy. The morning sun rose sluggishly over the small town of Millstone, its warm rays casting a golden hue over the rows of modest homes and neatly trimmed lawns. Millstone was the kind of place where everyone seemed to know everyone else, where the familiar chime of the church bell marked time, and the faint scent of fresh bread wafting from the corner bakery carried a sense of comfort. But beneath its picturesque charm, Millstone harbored an undercurrent of tension, a quiet divide that had festered for generations, whispered in hushed conversations and unspoken glances. At the heart of this story was Jamal Hayes, a 14-year-old boy with a smile as bright as the sun itself. Jamal had always been a beacon of optimism, a kid who saw the world not for what it was but for what it could be. He lived with his father, William Hayes, a man who commanded respect not just because of his title as the town's police chief but because of the unwavering integrity that shaped every decision he made. William was a tall, imposing figure with a sharp gaze that softened only when he was with his son. For all his authority, he carried himself with humility, earning the admiration of many and the silent contempt of a few. Jamal and his father had built a life that was steady and filled with purpose. Their home was a modest but welcoming place, walls adorned with photographs of Jamal's late mother and their shared memories. Jamal's days were often spent balancing school, basketball practice, and helping his father with small tasks around town. But it was on the court where Jamal truly came alive. His love for the game wasn't just about scoring points, it was about the camaraderie, the sense of belonging that came from being part of a team. He dreamed of one day playing professionally, a dream that fueled his relentless drive. But not everyone in Millstone shared the same respect for the Hayes family. Officer Greg Landry had been with the Millstone Police Department for over a decade, a tenure marked by his reputation as a hard-nosed enforcer. Landry was a man who thrived on control, his presence a storm cloud that darkened any room he entered. He was known for his sharp tongue and an unwavering belief in his own superiority. Beneath his badge lay a deep-seated prejudice, a worldview shaped by bitterness and an unwillingness to embrace change. Landry had clashed with William on more than one occasion, their disagreement stemming not from duty but from Landry's disdain for William's inclusive approach to leadership. For Landry, power was a tool to be wielded, not a responsibility to be honored. Jamal's routine walk home from basketball practice began as any other, the rhythmic squeak of his sneakers against the pavement accompanying his thoughts of the upcoming tournament. He often took the longer route through the park, relishing the quiet moments where the world seemed to fade away. The park was a neutral space, a place where laughter echoed from playgrounds and friends gathered without care. But on this particular afternoon, Jamal noticed the familiar black and white police cruiser parked by the edge of the park. Landry leaned against the vehicle, arms crossed, his eyes locking on Jamal with a predatory gleam. "Where you heading, kid?" Landry's voice broke the stillness, its tone more an accusation than a question. Jamal hesitated, his gut instinct urging him to keep walking, but respect for authority, ingrained in him by his father, made him stop. "Just heading home," Jamal replied, his voice steady despite the unease crawling up his spine. Landry's smirk widened as he pushed off the car, closing the distance between them. "You're a long way from your side of town, aren't you?" The words hung in the air, a challenge laced with something far more sinister. Jamal's mind raced as Landry's questions grew more pointed, each one designed to chip away at his composure. The officer's voice grew louder, more insistent, drawing the attention of a passerby who quickly diverted their gaze and walked away. Landry's accusations escalated, shifting from veiled insults to outright threats. People like you think you can just wander wherever you want, don't you? Think you're untouchable because of who your daddy is? Landry's words stung, each one a reminder of the quiet battles Jamal and his father fought daily. The situation spiraled as Landry grabbed Jamal by the arm, his grip firm and unyielding. "Let's see how tough you are when you're not hiding behind that badge," he sneered, dragging Jamal toward the tracks that cut through the outskirts of the park. The boy struggled, fear giving way to defiance as he tried to pull away, but Landry was stronger, his grip like iron. "You think you're so special, don't you? That you're better than the rest of us? Time to learn your place." The tracks loomed closer, their cold steel gleaming ominously in the afternoon light. Jamal's heart raced as Landry forced him to his knees, pulling zip ties from his belt and binding the boy's hands. The officer's expression was a twisted mix of satisfaction and malice, a man reveling in his own perceived power. Jamal's voice cracked as he pleaded, "You don't have to do this. Please, just let me go." But Landry's response was a chilling laugh, the sound devoid of empathy or remorse. The distant sound of a train whistle broke through the tension, its echo growing louder with each passing second. Jamal's thoughts turned to his father, the man who had taught him to stand tall in the face of adversity, who had instilled in him the belief that justice would always prevail. He clung to that belief now, even as the vibrations of the tracks beneath him threatened to shatter it. As Landry stepped back, arms crossed, a new sound joined the growing cacophony, the wail of a siren, sharp and unrelenting. Tires screeched to a halt, and the sound of a car door slamming signaled the arrival of someone who would change the course of events. Landry's smirk faltered as he turned to face the newcomer, his confidence wavering under the weight of authority he could not defy. Jamal's story had only just begun, but the echoes of that moment on the tracks would ripple far beyond the quiet borders of Millstone. What followed would test the bonds of family, the limits of justice, and the strength of a community divided by prejudice. As the sun dipped lower on the horizon, the question lingered, when faced with the stark reality of hate, would justice truly prevail? Or would the scars of that day mark more than just the tracks beneath Jamal's feet? The air around the train tracks grew tense as the distant sound of the siren grew louder. Jamal's heart raced, hope and fear colliding within him. His wrists were still bound, his knees pressing into the gritty gravel, but he dared to look up. Landry stood rigid now, his smug expression faltering as a black SUV screeched to a halt nearby. The door swung open with force, and from the vehicle emerged Chief William Hayes, his commanding presence silencing the scene before a single word left his mouth. Landry's confidence wavered, but he quickly tried to mask it with an air of defiance. "Chief," he began, his tone casual, almost dismissive. "This isn't what it looks like. I was just trying to teach this kid a lesson about respect." His voice carried a forced ease, but it was clear from his stance that he knew he was caught in a moment he couldn't easily explain away. William's gaze shifted from Landry to Jamal, his eyes narrowing as he took in the sight of his son tied to the tracks. The fire in his chest was tempered only by his years of discipline, his expression a mask of cold fury as he spoke, his voice low but carrying the weight of authority. "Untie him. Now." For a moment, Landry hesitated, as if considering his options, but the edge in William's voice left no room for negotiation. Reluctantly, he knelt and pulled a knife from his belt, slicing through the plastic ties. Jamal scrambled back, his wrists red and raw, but before William could step forward to check on him, Jamal spoke, his voice shaky but firm. He said I needed to learn my place. That I shouldn't be where I don't belong." William's jaw tightened, the weight of his son's words landing heavy in the silence. He turned back to Landry, his voice controlled but brimming with anger. "Is that what this was? You thought you'd teach a child, my child, a lesson in your twisted version of discipline?" Landry straightened, a shadow of defiance still lingering in his stance. "With all due respect, Chief," the boy was out of line. "I was just doing what needed to be done." The tension between them was palpable, a battle of wills unfolding in the open field. Jamal stayed silent, his body tense as he watched his father confront a man who had always seemed untouchable. William took a step closer to Landry, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm. You don't decide who belongs where. And you don't lay a hand on anyone, let alone a child, because of your prejudice. You crossed a line, Landry, and you know it. For a moment, it seemed as if Landry might back down, but then his expression hardened, his voice rising defensively. You think you're better than me, don't you? Walking around like you're the hero of this town. But we both know how this place works. People like you might wear the badge, but you'll never really fit in. The words hung in the air like a slap, their venom a stark reminder of the divide that still lingered in Millstone. Jamal's stomach churned, the raw hatred in Landry's voice cutting deeper than the zip ties ever had. But William didn't flinch. Instead, he took another step forward, his voice steady, his authority unwavering. This isn't about me. It's about you abusing the power you were entrusted with. You think you're untouchable because you've hidden behind this badge, but that ends today. Landry's smirk returned, though it lacked its former confidence. You really think you can get rid of me? I've been here longer than you. I've got friends who see things the way I do. You think they'll take your side when it's my word against yours? William's gaze didn't waver, but Jamal noticed the tension in his shoulders, the silent battle playing out in his father's mind. Landry wasn't entirely wrong. The department, the town, there were those who would back him, not because they believed him, but because it was easier to maintain the status quo than to confront the truth. Before William could respond, another car pulled up, its tires crunching on the gravel. Out stepped Officer Simmons, a younger member of the force who had always shown respect toward William. Simmons' eyes widened as he took in the scene, the still-bound zip ties lying at Jamal's feet, the tension crackling between the two men. Chief, Simmons began, his voice careful, I got the call about a disturbance. What's going on here? Landry jumped at the opportunity, his tone dripping with false authority. Nothing to worry about, Simmons. Just handling a situation that got a little out of hand. Simmons glanced at William, then at Jamal, and his expression shifted. That's not what it looks like, he said quietly, his words directed more at William than at Landry. William nodded slightly, his voice measured. It's exactly what it looks like. Landry here decided to take justice into his own hands, and now he thinks he can explain it all away. He stepped aside, giving Simmons a full view of Jamal, who was still visibly shaken. Simmons' face darkened, and for the first time, Jamal saw a glimmer of something he hadn't expected, solidarity. Chief, you need me to call this in? Simmons asked, his hand already hovering near his radio. Landry stiffened, his bravado faltering as the weight of the moment began to settle on him. No, William said after a long pause, his voice calm but resolute. I'll handle this. He turned back to Landry, his gaze sharp as a blade. You're done here. Turn in your badge and gun. Effective immediately. Landry's face turned a deep shade of red, his hands balling into fists at his sides. You can't do this, he spat. I've given this department years of my life. And you've spent those years abusing the trust that comes with that badge, William shot back. You've left me no choice. The words carried a finality that even Landry couldn't deny. He took a step back, his face contorted with anger, but it was clear he had no fight left in him. With one last glare at William, he turned and stormed toward his car, slamming the door behind him. As the dust settled, Simmons stepped closer to William, his voice low. What's the plan now, Chief? William didn't respond immediately. Instead, he placed a hand on Jamal's shoulder, his grip firm but comforting. Jamal looked up at him, his eyes filled with questions that couldn't yet be answered. Finally, William spoke, his voice quiet but resolute. The truth will come out. It always does. But as they left the tracks behind, Jamal couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. The weight of Landry's words lingered in the air, and the unspoken tensions in Millstone felt heavier than ever. Something was building beneath the surface, and Jamal couldn't help but wonder what it would take to finally bring it all to light. The train tracks were silent now, but they carried the echoes of a moment that would change everything. And as they walked away, the question loomed, what would it cost to uncover the truth? The small conference room in the Millstone Police Department was heavy with an air of unease. The fluorescent lights hummed faintly above, casting a pale glow over the gathered officers. William Hayes stood at the head of the table, his posture firm, but there was a storm behind his eyes. Across from him sat Landry, his face a mask of defiance, though the tension in his jaw betrayed his unease. Simmons and two other officers lingered by the door, their expressions tight, caught between curiosity and apprehension. "You dragged me here for what? A lecture?" Landry's voice cut through the silence, sharp and bitter. "You think you can turn me into some kind of scapegoat to save your own reputation?" William didn't flinch, his voice steady but loaded with restrained anger. "This isn't about saving anything. This is about accountability. About you facing the consequences of your actions." Landry leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed, his smirk returning. "Consequences? You really think anyone's going to care? You can try to make me the villain, but people around here know the truth. They know how this town works. Do they?" William shot back, stepping closer. "Do they know you tied a child to train tracks because of the color of his skin? Do they know you've been abusing your badge to intimidate and control people who don't look like you? Because if they don't know yet, they will. I'll make sure of it." The room grew quieter, the weight of William's words hanging heavy in the air. Simmons shifted uncomfortably, his gaze flickering between the two men. Landry's smirk faltered, his confidence cracking as he leaned forward. "You think you can bring me down? You don't know who you're dealing with. I've got people in this department who see things my way. You might wear the title of chief, but you don't have the control you think you do. If you push me, I'll make sure you regret it." William's jaw tightened, but he remained calm, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm. "You don't get it, do you? This isn't just about you and me. This is about every person you've hurt, every family you've torn apart with your hatred. Your time is up, Landry. The system you've been hiding behind isn't going to protect you anymore." For a moment, Landry said nothing, his eyes narrowing as he studied William. Then, he leaned back again, a low chuckle escaping his lips. "You're so sure of yourself. But let me tell you something, Chief. You're not the hero you think you are. You've got skeletons in your closet, just like the rest of us. How do you think people are going to react when they find out you're not so perfect either?" William's gaze didn't waver, though his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Whatever you think you know, whatever you're holding on to, it doesn't change what you've done. You crossed a line that can't be ignored." Landry's smirk returned, but before he could respond, the door opened, and a younger officer stepped inside, holding a file. His expression was grim as he handed the file to William. "Chief, you're going to want to see this." William took the file, his brows furrowing as he opened it. His eyes scanned the contents, his expression hardening with each passing moment. Jamal's name appeared repeatedly in the report, alongside records of incidents involving other young boys from the same part of town. Patterns of complaints, accusations of harassment, and cover-ups, all tied back to Landry. William's voice was low but laced with determination. "This isn't just about Jamal, is it? This goes deeper than I thought." Landry's smirk vanished, replaced by a flicker of unease. "You don't know what you're talking about," he snapped, but there was a quiver in his voice now, a crack in his armor. William slammed the file onto the table, his voice rising for the first time. "You've been using your badge as a weapon, targeting kids, families, entire neighborhoods. And you thought no one would notice? You thought you could keep this hidden forever?" Landry stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. You don't have proof. These are just complaints, rumors. You can't pin anything on me. Can't I? William's voice was sharp, his eyes burning with resolve. Do you really think no one's been watching? That your victims haven't been documenting, gathering evidence, waiting for someone to listen? It's all here, Landry. Every lie you've told, every person you've hurt. And now it's over. The room was silent, the tension so thick it was suffocating. Simmons exchanged a glance with the other officers, the weight of the moment sinking in. Landry's bravado crumbled further, his face pale as he realized the walls were closing in. You can't do this, he said again, but the desperation in his voice betrayed him. I'll fight this. I'll take you down with me. William stepped closer, his voice quiet but firm. You don't scare me, Landry. And you don't scare the people who are finally ready to speak out against you. Your time is up. Landry's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, his defiance replaced by a simmering rage. The silence stretched, heavy and unrelenting, until Simmons finally spoke, his voice cautious but resolute. Chief, what's the next move? William didn't look away from Landry, his gaze steady. We do this by the book. No shortcuts, no compromises. Justice, not revenge. The weight of the moment settled over everyone in the room. Landry's reign of fear and intimidation was crumbling before their eyes, but the battle wasn't over yet. As the tension thickened, one thing became clear, the truth was finally coming to light, and there was no turning back. But as they prepared to take the next steps, an unease lingered in the air, a sense that the fallout from Landry's actions would be far-reaching. And as William walked out of the room, his thoughts heavy with the weight of what was to come, one question burned in his mind: how many more secrets would be uncovered before this was over? The tension in the station seemed to weigh down every corner of the building. It wasn't just the walls, the floors, or the quiet hum of the fluorescent lights overhead, it was the very air, thick and stifling, carrying with it the weight of everything that had just transpired. Every step William Hayes took down the corridor felt heavier than the last. He could feel the quiet gazes of those around him, officers who lingered in the hallway, pretending to busy themselves but clearly watching. Their expressions ranged from curious to concerned, and though no one said anything aloud, their eyes said enough. The truth, long buried beneath layers of routine and denial, was now surfacing. It wasn't a trickle, it was a flood, and the entire department could feel it. When William turned the corner, he saw Jamal sitting in his office. His son's presence was a sharp contrast to the chaos outside, but his posture, tense and guarded, betrayed the storm of emotions he was still grappling with. Jamal looked up when the door opened, his face a mix of relief, uncertainty, and lingering fear. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. William shut the door behind him, letting the latch click into place, sealing off the noise from the rest of the station. What's going to happen to him? Jamal asked, his voice quiet but deliberate. He didn't need to elaborate. They both knew exactly who him was. The boy's question wasn't just one of curiosity, it was layered with the kind of skepticism born from years of seeing people like Landry escape accountability. William exhaled slowly and sank into the chair across from Jamal. He studied his son's face for a moment before answering. He's going to face the consequences, he said. His tone was steady, calm, but there was a quiet storm beneath it, a promise that no matter how difficult the road ahead might be, Landry wouldn't escape justice. Jamal nodded, but his hands fidgeted in his lap. He wasn't fully convinced. He won't get away with it, right? He pressed, his voice growing stronger. People like him, they always seem to get away with it. The pain in Jamal's voice was like a dagger to William's heart. His son wasn't just asking about Landry, he was asking about a world that had let him and so many others down time and time again. William leaned forward, his voice softening but losing none of its conviction. Not this time, he said firmly. This time, we're not letting him slip through the cracks. He's going to answer for what he's done, to you, to this town, to everyone he's hurt. Jamal's gaze dropped to his hands. He traced the faint red marks on his wrists where the zip ties had dug into his skin, a reminder of just how close he had come to losing everything. His voice cracked as he spoke. I thought, he paused, struggling to find the words. I thought I wasn't going to make it. When he put me on those tracks, I thought that was it. I thought my life was over. William reached out, resting a firm but gentle hand on his son's shoulder. His voice was low, tinged with a mix of sorrow and anger. What he did to you was unforgivable. I can't imagine how scared you must have been, but you're here now. You're alive, Jamal. And I swear to you, I'm going to make sure nothing like that ever happens to you again. Jamal's hands stopped moving. He looked up at his father, his eyes filled with something that wasn't quite fear anymore, something closer to determination. It wasn't just me, he said after a moment, his voice steadying. He's done this before, hasn't he? To other kids. I could tell by the way he talked, like it was normal for him. William nodded slowly, the weight of Jamal's realization adding to his own. You're right. There are other kids. We're uncovering more every hour, complaints that were ignored, reports that were buried, families that were too afraid to come forward. But that's changing now. People are starting to speak up. And it's all because of you, Jamal. Your courage is showing them that they don't have to stay silent. Jamal leaned back in his chair, his expression hardening. What can I do to help? He asked. His voice was quiet but firm. I don't want to just sit here and wait for things to happen. I want to help stop him. William's heart swelled with pride, but it was tempered by the fierce instinct to protect his son from further harm. You've already done so much, he said gently. You stood up to him. You survived. And now you're inspiring others to speak out. That's more than enough. But Jamal shook his head. It's not enough. If standing up to him means no one else has to go through what I did, then it's worth it. I'm not afraid anymore, Dad. William opened his mouth to respond, but a sharp knock at the door interrupted him. The door opened, and Simmons stepped in, his expression grim. Chief, we've got a problem, he said without preamble. Landry's gone. The words hit William like a physical blow. He shot to his feet, his voice sharp. What do you mean, gone? Simmons hesitated, glancing at Jamal before continuing. He left the station before we could secure him. One of the officers said they saw him heading for his car, but no one stopped him. We've got no idea where he is. William cursed under his breath, running a hand over his face. Did anyone follow him? Do we have a lead on where he might have gone? Simmons shook his head, his unease evident. Not yet. But we're working on it. I thought you should know. William nodded, his mind racing. Put out an alert, he ordered. Notify the state police. Let them know he's a flight risk. And start looking into his known associates. If he's got allies in this department, I want their names on my desk by the end of the hour. Simmons nodded and left the room, leaving William and Jamal alone again. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Jamal broke the silence, his voice quiet but steady. He's not going to stop, is he? Even if he's caught, he's not going to stop. William sat down again, the exhaustion visible on his face. People like him, they hold on to their hate like it's the only thing keeping them alive. But hate doesn't win in the end, Jamal. It burns itself out. And when it does, we'll still be here. Standing. Jamal's expression softened, but his resolve didn't waver. I believe you. But we have to make sure everyone else believes it too. William looked at his son, a flicker of hope breaking through the heaviness in his chest. We will, he said quietly but firmly. Together, we'll make sure they do. The station buzzed with activity as officers scrambled to track down Landry. The cracks in Millstone's foundation had widened into deep fractures, and it was clear that the truth was about to topple everything. But for the first time in years, it felt like real change was possible. As William prepared for what was to come, he knew one thing: the fight wasn't over, but they were no longer fighting it alone. The hours after Landry's escape were a blur of activity. The department was alive with the sound of ringing phones, hurried footsteps, and low, urgent conversations. Officers coordinated with state police, combing through every lead and checking every possible hiding spot. Simmons worked tirelessly to pull records of Landry's known associates, and the deeper he dug, the more the tangled web of corruption began to unravel. Each new file, each new name, was another piece of a puzzle that revealed just how far Landry's influence had spread. But despite the chaos, the one thing missing was the man himself. William sat in his office, staring at the map spread across his desk. Red pins marked areas where Landry had been seen or might go, but the uncertainty gnawed at him. He was a man used to solving problems, used to methodically breaking down challenges until there was nothing left but clarity. But this wasn't just a case, this was personal. Landry's actions weren't just an attack on Jamal or even on the community, they were an attack on everything William stood for. The thought that Landry was still out there, free to potentially hurt someone else, was like a stone in his chest. Jamal sat across from him, uncharacteristically quiet. The boy's usual spark of curiosity and determination was dimmed, replaced by a somber focus. He had insisted on staying at the station, refusing to go home until Landry was caught. William hadn't had the heart to argue. Now, Jamal watched his father closely, his own thoughts racing as he tried to piece together what would come next. "Do you think he's still in town?" Jamal finally asked, breaking the silence. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it: anger, fear, a need for answers. William leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "If he's smart, he'll try to get as far away as possible," he said. "But Landry's not the kind of man who lets things go. He's angry, and angry people make mistakes. That might be the one thing working in our favor." Jamal nodded slowly, his mind clearly turning over the possibilities. "But what if he doesn't run? What if he's planning something else?" William's stomach tightened at the thought, but he kept his expression neutral. "If he does, we'll be ready for him. He's already exposed himself for what he is. The whole department is watching now. He can't hide anymore." The words were meant to reassure, but they sounded hollow even to William. He knew better than anyone how deeply rooted the culture of silence and complicity could be. Landry might not have the official power of his badge anymore, but that didn't mean he was powerless. And if there were others in the department still loyal to him, the fight was far from over. A sharp knock on the door interrupted their conversation. Simmons stepped inside, holding a thick folder and a tablet. His expression was grim but determined. "Chief, we've got something," he said, placing the folder on the desk. "A lead on Landry's whereabouts. One of our informants spotted him near the old quarry on the edge of town." William's brows furrowed. The quarry had been abandoned for years, a forgotten corner of Millstone that most people avoided. It was remote, isolated, and easy to overlook, exactly the kind of place someone might go to disappear. "Did they see anyone else with him?" he asked, already standing and reaching for his jacket. Simmons nodded. There were a couple of cars parked nearby, but the informant couldn't get a good look at who was inside. "It's possible he's meeting someone." The implications hung heavy in the air. If Landry was meeting with allies, it meant he wasn't just running, he was regrouping. The thought sent a chill through William. This wasn't just about avoiding justice anymore, this was about revenge, about reclaiming the power Landry believed was his. "I'm going out there," William said, his voice firm. He turned to Jamal, who was already on his feet. "You're staying here." Jamal's eyes widened in protest. "No, I'm not. You said it yourself, he's angry, and angry people make mistakes. If he's planning something, I need to know what it is." Jamal, This isn't up for debate, William said, his tone leaving no room for argument. This is dangerous, and I'm not risking you getting hurt again. Jamal's jaw tightened, his frustration clear. You can't protect me from everything, Dad. I'm not a little kid anymore. If you're going after him, I should be there. He's my fight too. William hesitated, the conflict evident on his face. He knew Jamal's determination wasn't just stubbornness, it was courage born of everything he had endured. But the thought of putting his son in harm's way was unbearable. Before he could respond, Simmons spoke up. Chief, he's got a point, Simmons said carefully. Landry targeted Jamal for a reason. If he's planning something, Jamal might be the key to figuring it out. William sighed, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. Finally, he nodded. Fine, he said, his voice reluctant. But you stay close to me. And if I tell you to leave, you leave. Understood? Jamal nodded quickly, his resolve unwavering. Understood. The drive to the quarry was tense, the silence in the car broken only by the hum of the engine and the occasional crackle of the radio. Simmons followed in a separate vehicle, a few other officers joining the convoy. As they neared the quarry, the landscape grew more desolate, the trees thinning out to reveal the jagged cliffs and the deep, still water below. William parked the car at a distance, motioning for everyone to stay quiet as they approached on foot. The air was heavy, the faint scent of damp earth and rust lingering in the breeze. As they crept closer, they spotted the cars, two dark sedans parked near the edge of the quarry, their windows tinted. William's hand rested on his holstered weapon as he signaled for the others to fan out. Jamal stayed close, his heart pounding in his chest as they moved closer. The tension was unbearable, every step feeling like it might be the one to set everything in motion. Then, a voice broke the silence, sharp and angry. You think you can just take everything from me? You think you've won? It was Landry. He was standing near the edge of the quarry, his back to them, gesturing wildly as he spoke to someone hidden in the shadows. William strained to hear the response, but the wind carried the words away. Jamal's breath caught as Landry turned slightly, revealing a weapon in his hand. The sight of it sent a jolt of fear through him, but William's steady hand on his shoulder kept him grounded. They were so close now, the tension stretched to its breaking point. And then, everything happened at once. Landry turned, his eyes widening as he spotted them. The flash of recognition was followed by a sneer, his voice dripping with contempt. So, you finally showed up, Chief. Brought your little hero too, I see. The moment hung in the air, electric with the promise of confrontation. Landry's voice was steady, but the look in his eyes betrayed the chaos brewing beneath the surface. William stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. It's over, Landry. Put the weapon down. But Landry didn't move. His grip tightened, his expression twisting with rage. Over? No, it's just getting started. The seconds stretched into an eternity, every breath filled with the weight of what was about to happen. The moment seemed to freeze, the tension crackling in the cold air like electricity. William held his ground, his eyes locked on Landry. Every fiber of his being screamed to act, to stop this before it spiraled further, but he knew one wrong move could tip the balance into chaos. Jamal stood a few feet behind him, his chest tight with fear, but his gaze was unwavering. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, the gravity of what his father was facing, what they were all facing. Landry's laugh shattered the silence, sharp and bitter, echoing off the walls of the quarry. He waved the weapon in his hand, gesturing toward William and the officers who had spread out behind him. You really think you can just walk in here and take me down? After everything I've done for this town, for people like you? His voice was dripping with venom, his words laced with a twisted sense of self-justification. William's voice was calm, steady, but there was no mistaking the steel beneath it. Put the gun down, Landry. You've already crossed too many lines. Don't make this worse for yourself. Landry scoffed, his eyes narrowing as he took a step closer to the edge of the quarry. Worse? Worse than being stabbed in the back by the people I trusted? Worse than having everything I've worked for torn apart because of a bunch of lies? His gaze flicked to Jamal, his expression twisting with contempt. And all because of him. Jamal's heart pounded, but he refused to look away. There was anger in his chest, but also something deeper, a determination not to let Landry's words shake him. He knew what this man had done, not just to him but to others, and he wasn't going to let him rewrite the story. William stepped forward, just enough to draw Landry's attention back to him. You did this to yourself, Greg. Your actions, your choices, this is the result of the hate you've carried for so long. Don't try to blame a child for your mistakes. Landry's laugh was sharp, almost manic. Mistakes? You think I made a mistake when I tried to teach that boy a lesson? You think it was a mistake to show him what happens when you step out of line? He pointed the gun toward the ground, his grip tightening. No, Chief, the mistake was thinking people like you could ever run things around here. You don't belong in that office, and he doesn't belong in this town. The words hit like a slap, and Jamal felt his father stiffen beside him. William's voice dropped, cold and firm. This ends now. You can choose to come with us and face what you've done, or you can let this hate consume you completely. Either way, your reign is over. For a moment, Landry seemed to hesitate. His eyes darted between William, Jamal, and the officers surrounding him. The weight of the situation was finally sinking in, but the defiance in his expression remained. You think you've won, don't you? He said, his voice quieter now but still filled with malice. You think taking me down is going to fix everything, that it's going to change how people see you? William didn't waver. This isn't about me. It's about justice, about making sure no one else has to suffer because of you. Landry's gaze flickered to Jamal again, and something in his face shifted. For the first time, there was a glimmer of something other than anger, something that looked almost like regret. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by a grim determination. You're wrong, he said, his voice low. None of this is going to change anything. And then, with a suddenness that took everyone off guard, Landry turned and bolted toward the edge of the quarry. Chaos erupted as officers shouted and moved to intercept him, but William's voice cut through the noise like a blade. Hold your fire. Jamal watched in stunned silence as Landry stopped at the very edge of the cliff, the dark water below shimmering faintly in the dim light. The gun was still in his hand, but he made no move to use it. Instead, he turned back to face William, his expression a mix of defiance and resignation. You'll never understand, he said, his voice carrying over the stillness. You'll never understand what it's like to lose everything. William took a step forward, his hands raised in a gesture of calm. You don't have to do this, Greg. You still have a choice. You can face what you've done, take responsibility, and try to make things right. Landry shook his head, a bitter smile playing on his lips. It's too late for that. It's been too late for a long time. Before anyone could react, Landry turned and threw the gun into the water below. The sound of it hitting the surface echoed through the quarry, followed by a deafening silence. For a moment, it seemed as though he might surrender, but then he stepped closer to the edge, his back to the officers. Greg, don't. William's voice was sharp, urgent, filled with a desperation that caught even Jamal off guard. It doesn't have to end this way. There's always a way back. Landry didn't turn around. His voice was quiet, almost a whisper. Not for me. And then, in one fluid motion, he stepped off the edge. Time seemed to slow as the officers rushed forward, but it was too late. Landry's body disappeared into the water below, the ripples spreading outward like the echo of everything he had done. William stood at the edge, his hands clenched into fists, his expression unreadable. Jamal moved to stand beside him, his chest tight with a mix of emotions he couldn't fully process. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the faint sound of the water lapping against the rocks. Simmons approached cautiously, his voice low. "What do we do now, Chief?" William didn't answer immediately. He stared down at the water, his thoughts a storm of anger, grief, and frustration. Finally, he turned away, his voice steady but filled with an unshakable resolve. "We move forward. We finish what he started, and we make sure this department, this town, never let someone like him hold power again." Jamal looked up at his father, his heart aching but also filled with a sense of hope. For all the darkness they had faced, for all the pain and injustice, there was still a path forward. And as they walked away from the edge, he knew they were taking the first steps towards something better. The drive back to the station was silent, the kind of silence that was heavy and suffocating, filled with words unsaid and emotions too raw to name. Jamal sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window at the blur of trees and streetlights, his hands fidgeting in his lap. He kept replaying the moment in his mind, the sight of Landry standing at the edge of the quarry, the finality in his voice before he disappeared into the dark water. It was as if the world had stopped for a fraction of a second, only to lurch forward again, leaving him struggling to catch up. William's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white against the leather. His face was a mask of calm, but Jamal could see the tension in his father's posture, the way his jaw clenched and his eyes stayed fixed on the road as if looking anywhere else might shatter the fragile composure he was holding on to. Neither of them spoke, the weight of what had just happened hanging between them like a storm cloud, thick and oppressive. When they finally pulled into the station parking lot, William turned off the engine but didn't move to get out of the car. Jamal glanced at him, unsure if he should say something, but the words caught in his throat. He wasn't sure what he even wanted to say. Everything felt too big, too complicated to put into words. After a long moment, William broke the silence, his voice low and heavy. "Are you okay?" he asked, his eyes still fixed on the dashboard. It wasn't an easy question, and he knew it, but it was the only one he could bring himself to ask. Jamal hesitated, searching for an answer. "I don't know," he said finally, his voice quiet but steady. "It doesn't feel real. The way he looked at you, the way he talked, it's like he didn't see a way out. Like he gave up." William nodded slowly, his gaze distant. "He made his choices, Jamal. And those choices hurt a lot of people. But no matter how much anger or hate someone carries, it's still hard to see them fall like that. It's hard to see them let it consume them completely." Jamal frowned, his hands gripping the edge of his seat. "Do you think he meant what he said? About nothing changing, about it all staying the same?" The question hung in the air, and for a moment, Jamal thought his father wouldn't answer. William sighed, finally looking at his son. "Change doesn't come easy," he said. "And it doesn't come fast. People like Landry, they thrive on the idea that the system will always protect them, that their power will always go unchecked. But the fact that he's gone now, the fact that people are starting to speak out, that's a step forward. It doesn't mean the fight is over, but it means we're moving in the right direction." Jamal nodded, but the uncertainty in his expression remained. "It just feels like even when you win, you still lose something. I don't know how to explain it." "You're right," William said softly. "We did lose something today. We lost the chance to hold him accountable, to make him face what he did. And that's not something I take lightly. But what we can do now is make sure the people who were hurt by him know they're not alone. That they have a voice. And that this department, this town, won't let something like this happen again." Jamal didn't respond immediately, his thoughts swirling as he tried to make sense of it all. Finally, he turned to his father, his voice quiet but firm. "Do you really think it'll be enough? That people will believe it can change?" William placed a hand on Jamal's shoulder, his grip steady and reassuring. "I think it has to be enough. And I think people will believe it if we show them it's possible. That starts with us. With the choices we make, the way we carry ourselves. You've already shown more courage than most people could ever dream of, Jamal. That's the kind of example that inspires change. Jamal met his father's gaze, and for the first time since they left the quarry, he felt a glimmer of hope. It wasn't much, but it was something to hold on to. They got out of the car and walked into the station together, the quiet determination in their steps speaking louder than any words could. Inside, the atmosphere was subdued but charged. Officers moved quickly between desks, their voices low but purposeful. Simmons approached them as soon as they entered, his face a mix of relief and worry. "Chief," he said, nodding to William before glancing at Jamal. "Glad you're both back safe." William nodded in return. "Any updates?" he asked, his tone clipped but not unkind. Simmons hesitated, then handed William a file. "We've been going through everything we have on Landry, piecing together the extent of what he was involved in. It's worse than we thought. There are connections to people higher up, and it looks like he was part of a larger network. It's going to take time to unravel it all, but we're getting there." William's expression hardened as he flipped through the file. "Keep digging," he said. "I want every name, every detail. This doesn't end with him." Jamal watched the exchange silently, his mind racing. He wanted to ask about the other kids Landry had hurt, about whether they would ever see justice, but the words felt too heavy to say out loud. Instead, he followed his father into the back office, where William set the file down and rubbed his temples. "You're tired," Jamal said softly, the concern in his voice evident. William gave a small, weary smile. "We both are," he said. "But we don't stop just because we're tired." Jamal nodded, understanding the weight of those words. They didn't stop because stopping wasn't an option. There were still so many pieces to pick up, so many wounds to heal. And as daunting as it felt, he knew they would keep going. Together. The weeks that followed were a blur of change and reckoning for Millstone. The investigation into Landry's actions expanded rapidly, uncovering layers of corruption that had seeped into the department for years. Files once thought lost were recovered, complaints that had been buried were finally acknowledged, and families who had been silenced began to speak out. It was as though a dam had broken, and the truth was pouring out in a wave that couldn't be stopped. For William Hayes, the aftermath was exhausting but necessary. He spent countless hours working with internal affairs, ensuring that every thread of Landry's network was pulled and examined. Each revelation brought a mix of anger and determination. Officers who had turned a blind eye, or worse, been complicit, were removed from their positions. It wasn't just about cleaning house, it was about rebuilding trust, one step at a time. For William, this wasn't just a professional responsibility, it was deeply personal. He knew what it meant for his son to see the system fail, and he was determined to prove that it could still work, that it could still deliver justice. Jamal found himself at the center of a different kind of attention. His courage in standing up to Landry became a symbol of resilience for the community. Teachers, neighbors, and even strangers approached him, offering words of support and admiration. At first, the attention felt overwhelming. He hadn't sought to be anyone's hero, he'd only wanted to survive. But as he listened to the stories of others who had been hurt, who had felt powerless, he realized the weight of his actions. His voice had given others the strength to find their own. Slowly, he began to embrace his role, speaking out at town halls and community gatherings, using his experience to push for real change. The department itself underwent a transformation. New officers were brought in, people who reflected the diversity of the community, who understood the importance of serving rather than dominating. Simmons, who had stood by William and Jamal through the ordeal, was promoted to a leadership position, where his integrity and commitment to justice could guide the department forward. For the first time in years, there was a sense of hope in Millstone, a belief that things could truly be different. One afternoon, Jamal found himself back at the basketball court where it had all begun. The familiar squeak of sneakers against the pavement, the rhythmic bounce of the ball, it felt like a return to something simpler, something normal. But as he played, he couldn't shake the sense that he was different now. He'd faced something he'd never thought he could, and it had changed him. It hadn't broken him. It had made him stronger. William joined him, watching from the sidelines for a while before stepping onto the court. They played a quiet game of one-on-one, the competition light but meaningful. It wasn't about winning, it was about reconnecting, finding their way back to the bond that had always grounded them. When they finally sat down on the bench, sweaty and out of breath, Jamal turned to his father with a small smile. "You think it's really over?" he asked, his voice thoughtful. William took a moment to respond, looking out at the horizon. "It's never really over," he said. "But we've taken a big step. And as long as we keep moving forward, as long as we don't stop fighting for what's right, we'll be okay." Jamal nodded, the words settling into his chest like a promise. He thought about the people who had stood with them, the ones who had come forward to tell their stories, the ones who had found their courage because of what he'd been through. It wasn't just about him or his father anymore. It was about all of them, about a community learning to heal and grow together. The final chapter of Landry's story came quietly. His body was recovered from the quarry days after the incident, bringing a somber end to a man who had caused so much pain. For many, there was no mourning, only relief. But for William and Jamal, there was also a sense of sadness, a recognition of how deeply hate could consume a person, of how much it could destroy. They chose not to dwell on him but on what his fall had revealed and the opportunities it had created for change. Millstone didn't become perfect overnight. No place ever does. But it became better. Schools began incorporating lessons on equality and justice, ensuring that the next generation would understand the importance of standing up against prejudice. Community programs were established to support those who had been marginalized for so long. And slowly, trust began to rebuild. It was a process, one that required patience and persistence, but it was progress. Jamal's story became one of resilience and hope, reminder that even in the face of injustice, courage could spark change. He went on to excel in school and basketball, earning a scholarship to a prestigious college. But more than his achievements, it was his character that left an impression. He remained connected to Millstone, returning often to mentor younger kids, to show them that their voices mattered, that they could be the change they wanted to see. William continued to lead with integrity, his efforts earning the respect of those who had once doubted him. Under his leadership, the Millstone Police Department became a model for other towns, proof that reform was possible. It wasn't easy, and there were setbacks along the way, but he never wavered in his commitment to justice. He knew he was building something that would outlast him, something that Jamal and others could carry forward. As their lives settled into a new normal, there was a quiet but unshakable sense of accomplishment. They hadn't just survived, they had changed the narrative. They had taken the worst of what hate could throw at them and turned it into something powerful, something hopeful. This story reminds us that even in the face of darkness, there is light. That change, though slow and difficult, is always worth pursuing. It asks us to consider our own role in the world, to think about the ways we can stand up, speak out, and create a better future for those who come after us. What would you do if you were in Jamal's shoes? How would you rise above the weight of injustice? We hope this story has inspired you as much as it has moved us to share it. If you believe in the power of resilience, courage, and justice, please don't forget to subscribe to Tales of Twist. Join our community, where we explore stories that challenge us, inspire us, and remind us of what truly matters. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.